Hi everyone, my name is Eduardo Lopez and let's take a look at how to create a storage account in an Azure subscription. I'm going to switch to my Azure Portal and we can find the option of a storage account under the favorites. If don't, you can click on all services and you can go for the storage category and clicking on storage accounts. Here you can see the list of your storage accounts in your subscription. If you are trying to just create one, we can click on add. That will open for us the blade for the deployment of our storage account. As with any other resource, we need to select the subscription and we have an option to deploy this storage account into an existing resource group or creating a new one. Let's say that we want to create a new storage account, and let's create one storage RG for a storage resource group, for example, creating a new resource group with this storage account. I'm going to click on OK, so that will finish my configuration for my new resource group. The next option will be the instance details, and here, for example, we need to specify a name for the storage account. This name needs to be unique globally because we are going to receive endpoints with our storage account depending on the type of storage account that we deploy. So in this case, that name needs to be unique globally, so we need to choose a name that it's not already taken from a different user. So in this case, for example, I can try for a specific name, storage account video, for example, and see if that name is available. If we can see the green check at the right, that means that that name is available to pick. Then comes the location. The location is basically all the regions where Azure has its data center. So you just need to pick a location there. It is recommended to pick a location that is close to you or close to your real needs with this specific resource. Let's say that I'm just picking the West US, for example. The next option will be to picking the performance. The performance, basically we have two options. The standard will be using hardware that it's going to use magnetic drives, HDDs, hard disk drives. If we choose the premium, we are using SSDs or solid state drives. Low latency, better performance. Obviously there is a different price for the performance options, so in this case I'm okay with the standard one, so I can just select the default value that it's the standard. And if I scroll down, we are going to find the account kind. For the account kind, basically we have three options. We can just deploy two general purpose versions, a version 1 and a version 2. The two general purpose contains 4 services at the same time. We are going to find a blob storage service, file service, a table storage service, and queue service too in the same storage account, and we can use the 4 services at the same time. The maximum default space that we are receiving with a single storage account is up to 500 terabytes. So we are basically into a general purpose. We are sharing the 500 terabytes between the 4 services. Now, the difference between the general purpose version 1 and the version 2 is basically the access tier. And the access tier, for example, here we can find two options. Picking an access tier for cool and an access tier for hot. That is basically will affect the placement into a specific node designed for cool or for hot. When we are selecting the hot one, we are telling Azure that we are going to use this data, or we are going to write, edit, and accessing or move the data so frequently. So when we pick the hot, Azure is deploying this storage account into a hot node that it's designed for that better performance. And when we pick the cool, we are telling Azure that we are not going to so frequently access this data. So by picking the cool, we are just, or Azure is deploying this specific storage account into a cool node. That actually can affect the price. because of the selection that we picked from that. If we go for the general purpose version 1, we're going to see that there is no access tier option on that it's basically the difference. The version 2, it's obviously must updated, so it's recommended to just pick the most updated version of the general purpose. And the third option is just picking blob storage. With just blob storage, we are not receiving the other 3 services at the same time with the same storage account. We are not getting the file service, table, or queue service, just blob storage. And this is recommended to picking just blob storage for the purpose of trying to migrate BHD files that came from the on-prem or maybe from a different cloud, or for hosting BHD files. Now, let me just pick the general purpose version 2 to be able to see the 4 services working at the same time into a storage account. Then comes the options of the replications. Basically, we have 4 options. Now here we can see just 3, but that depends on the location that we are selecting and also in the performance. There is 4 replication options, but with this selection that I'm just configuring here, I'm just getting the 3 ones. But I also wanted to explain the replication options, and I'm going to use the whiteboard for that. Here, for the replication of the high availability of our data, of our content into a storage account, we have the 4 options, or the 4 replication options. The first one is the locally redundant storage, or LRS, and just by picking that replication option, we are basically receiving an SLA, service level agreement, or a guarantee that our data will be available for a specific amount of time. In this case, we are receiving 11 nines for the LRS, or in other words, the 99.99999 11 nines for the SLA. And internally, by picking the LRS, Azure is taking 3 copies of our data and save it into different places, but in the same facilities. The next option will be the sun redundant. It's not available in all of the regions and not available in all of the options, so depending on our selection, we are going to see it or don't this sun redundant storage or replication storage. And Azure again is saving 3 copies of our content, but it's saving into different data centers, not in the same facility, and that is why we are receiving for this an SLA of 12 nines. Now the geo-redundant storage, now Azure is taking 6 copies. It's going to save 3 copies in the same facility into a primary region, and another 3 copies into a different facility into a completely different region. So, and that is why we are receiving a 16 nines for the SLA, picking the geo-redundant storage. The read access geo-redundant storage is basically the same functionality as the GRS. 6 copies, 3 on a primary and another 3 into a secondary. But the only difference is that in your secondary, you are always getting the read access for your secondary, and we are receiving the same SLA of the geo-redundant, 16 nines. So let me just pick for the replication the geo-redundant. We wanted to see it the primary and the secondary in the configuration once that we pick this option, and I'm going to select the access tier for cool. I'm okay with that option. I'm going to click on next, and the advanced tab, basically we have 4 options here, one for security. If we wanted to just allow HTTP and HTTPS, or just HTTP, that is the default option by selecting the enabled one. For virtual networks, here we have an option. If I just leave the defaults, from any device, from any place, from any internet connection, I can access the content or retrieving the content of my storage account. But if I switch to a selected network, I have an option to select from the list a specific VNet, and when I make this selection, basically only the resources that came from that are already linked to that VNet will be the only resources that can retrieve the content of my data. So This is another level of protection that we can configure here from here in the same deployment. But in my case, I don't have internal connection with a VNet, and I don't have any cross-premises connection. So my only option to see or to interact with my new storage account will be just selecting the all networks option. But after deployment, I can just change this configuration again. Let's say that I wanted to enforce security in the near future. When I do that, then I can switch to a selected network and then close to the incoming request from the all networks. But for this demonstration, I'm going to leave the default all network data protection. It is just enabled for the blob or the blob storage service. This is basically a recycle bin from my blob service. When I enable this, I have a blob soft delete option there. When I delete some content from my blob storage, they will be moved to my blobs of delete, and depending on my configuration on the blobs of delete, can be between 1 day, a week, or more than that. That content that I delete, it is going to be moved to the blobs of delete and automatically permanently disable or deleted from my storage account after it reaches the time that I just configure for the blobs of delete to persist the files. But by default it's disabled, but after deployment we have an option to just enable this service. Data lake storage, finally, it's just to upgrade my regular storage account, but for the purpose of being or using it for big data analytics. So in this case, I'm not going to use that. I don't want it to upgrade this storage account. I want a regular one, version 2, general purpose. So I can click on next to move on to the tax tab. And here we can configure friendly name value pairs to just quickly identify our storage account based on the tags, not on the name of our storage or something like that. We can deploy up to 15, and this can be applied to any resources, not just for the storage account. And I'm going to skip this option. I don't want it to configure tags. I can click on next, review plus create. This is basically the last part of the process. Is Azure is running a validation if I'm skipping or missing some required parameter, or if I choose wrong selection or something like that. I should see an error here that the validation don't pass, and I can see, or I can return and try to fix or troubleshoot the problem that I'm missing in the configuration. Finally, I can click on create. That will start or run or trigger the deployment of my storage account with my custom configuration. This will take between 1 or 2 minutes to deploy a general purpose version 2, and in the upcoming video I'm going to explain and taking an overview of the 4 main services that we're getting with this general purpose version 2 storage account. Thank you so much for your attention.